When I was 5 years old, I had a dog named Goliath. One day, my mother received a phone call. She turned to me with tears in her eyes and informed me that Goliath had been run over by a bus. I looked at her and thought to myself, so what, it's just a dog. But my mother was sad and I couldn't figure out why. I soon noticed that other people got sad when something died. It seemed really weird to me. Crying isn't going to change the fact that it's dead, so why are you crying? After a while, my senses returned to me, and I walked into my dad's bedroom at about 2 o'clock in the morning, Thanksgiving Day. I stood over him with the hammer, and I tried to think of one wrong thing he'd ever done to me. Nothing came to mind. So I drew back my arm and came down on him with all 230 pounds. I didn't know how fast blood could come out of someone's head. Kept hitting him until I was sure he was dead. Then I walked outside and drove away. There was no rush of freedom this time. I became so frustrated by our arguments that I began looking for other ways to defeat Randy. I made fun of him for getting molested when he was a child. I saw his 12-year-old sister in the visiting room, and I said some things about her that I'm not going to repeat here. I'd keep messing with him until he got upset, and when he got upset, I'd say, "Look at you, getting angry at me. You call yourself a Christian?"
When I was younger, my parents were very, very devout, and I was devout as a result of that. My parents taught me always to pray to Allah 5 times a day, at least, the mandatory prayers, and then beyond that, whatever prayers I wanted to pray in my own free time, pray that as well. And prayer was a part of my life. It was essential. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd say my morning prayers, but that would be preceded with a prayer to be read as my eyes opened in the morning. And then as I went to the bathroom, there'd be prayers to be read when I washed my hands, prayers to read before reading the Quran, right after reading the Quran, which I read mostly every day. And then going to school in the morning after the morning prayers, and then coming back, reading the afternoon prayers. Islam was ingrained in my being. And as such, my parents were very, very proud of me because I was the Muslim child that they were proud of raising. I came from a line of missionaries, and my family treated Islam, therefore, as an integral part of their lives, not something that they just did on the side. So Allah, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, we were all very much reverent and very much worshiping Allah all the time. It wasn't another religion so much as it was a way of life, and it was something that we were, not just we followed. And so Islam was not something that I was apathetic towards or even indifferent towards. It was my very way and my very being. David and I were rooming together, and right before going to sleep that night, he pulled out a Bible. And I hadn't really seen anyone read the Bible on their own free time. I had heard it preached from, I had heard people refer to it, but never actually seen anyone read it on their own free time. And I said to him, "David, you do know that that Bible's been changed, right? You do know that it's been tampered with. It's not the same Bible that was revealed to Christ hundreds of years ago." And
as I turned into my teens, we stopped going quite as much. My parents started having problems, and eventually my parents divorced, and sometime later my mom remarried. And after she was remarried, we started going back to church again. And I remember being kind of glad that I was going back to church, but it was all superficial. I would listen to the hymns and get emotional, and about that time my friends started going down front and making professions of faith. And so one Sunday I was moved by feelings and by the music and what my friends had done, and I went down front and made a decision for Christ. I didn't really know what I was doing or understand what was really taking place. I just knew something was wrong, and all my friends had done it, so I felt compelled to do it. But to follow my gay friends at that time, they were Canadians and they were living in the States, but they were going back to Canada, so I followed them, and I left my parents. I didn't tell them where I was going, I just left and went. And for about 2 years I lived up there in Canada, and I didn't tell my parents at all where I was at, where I didn't even contact them. For all they knew, I was dead somewhere. And I remember times where I would get very depressed and think, is there nothing more to life than drinking and doing drugs and this sin? And I was at a party, and everyone was inside, and they were drinking, and doing all sorts of things. And I was out on the patio of the balcony, and I was so tired of fighting in life and so tired of all of it, and I was so disgusted with myself that I wanted to commit suicide.
So as a kid, my family didn't really attend church. We just went, whenever it was convenient. But when I was 12, my dad had gotten into some trouble, hanging out with the wrong people, and just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we knew he could possibly be going to prison. And let me just say that my dad was not that type of person. It was devastating for our family because, he was a good dad. He was an awesome dad. And it was just not something I ever would have thought would have happened to me or to him. And so it was just devastating for our family. Of April, we were having a revival with Pastor Rick Drummond, and it was an all-week revival, and so I had listened to the preaching from Sunday until that Tuesday, and that Tuesday night I was finally understanding, that I was a sinner and I needed to be saved, and if I were to die right now, I knew I would go to hell. So at the invitation, I was standing there and I knew I needed to go, but I didn't. I couldn't make myself move. I was just too stubborn. So I went home knowing that if I died, I would go to hell.
It's almost like, yeah, of course there's no God. I actually, I remember a teacher at secondary school saying, who in here believes in God? And I remember looking around thinking, oh, nobody's going to put their hand up. And I remember this one girl called Jennifer Clegg put her hand up, and she must be so brave, when she put her hand up. And I just thought, wow, how silly. And then I remember him saying, and who, so I take it then everybody else is an atheist, and everybody was like so quick, to put their hands up, it's like it's a big bragging thing, yes, of course, I'm an atheist. Me, because I thought, oh no, what's going on, and then all Kevin could do was just reading his Bible all the time, he'd go to every meeting at the Anglican church, he wouldn't miss one, and then he started writing magazine, he would just had this passion for God, and but then I started to read the Bible, and rather than sort of read it to find truth, I was reading it to find fault. And every time I found something in the Bible that really just aggravated me, and like for instance, when Jesus says, to pluck out your eye, and to cut off your right hand, and I'd pick these texts up and I'd be like, oh, this is ridiculous. How can people do this? How can you, that's just nonsense. Anything I could grab hold of, I'd start trying to almost tear Kevin's faith down, and almost I just didn't want the Bible. I just didn't want the Bible because please, not here. Don't start talking about the Lord. Please, not here. And I couldn't relax for fear that Kevin might actually tell somebody, about the Lord. And I remember even in the car, he'd have music on sometimes, and if he'd had the window down, and I think other people could hear the Christian music being played, I'd want to wind the windows up, it really was just it was almost as if I was embarrassed.
I had no Christian instruction whatsoever. My mum was Jewish. She married a Gentile just after the Second World War. Went to church 3 times in 22 years as a non-Christian, and each time I was incredibly bored. I'm not exaggerating. I would think to myself, if I can't sleep one night, I'll get a preacher to come and talk to me. I had a very happy childhood. I wasn't molested, wasn't beaten up. I was bullied at one stage, but looking back, I was incredibly happy. Had my own business, making as much money as I want. Had my own house, my own car, beautiful wife, we'd made 1 kid, total freedom. I was my own boss at 18 or 19 years old. So in my happiness, I had a sense of futility, and this is what came to me at about the age of 20. 10 out of 10 die. I began to think about that. And one night I looked at my wife, she'd just gone to sleep, And I thought, she could die in a second, her heart could give out. And all my material things, my house, my business, my freedom, would be futile, it would be empty.
Through Ellis Island, my grandmother on my mother's side was oftentimes persecuted for her faith because being Croatian and Catholic are almost synonymous. You're almost a traitor if you leave Catholicism. Plus, the only evangelical church she could go to was Serbian. And the Catholics and the Serbians are constantly at war. So for my grandmother to leave Catholicism and then fellowship with Serbians was oftentimes very looked down upon. The second floor. And the family was gathered around the piano and started singing hymns. And my mother said she heard the hymns, but all of a sudden such a great remorse and weeping of sin and came over her that she started weeping so hysterically that they stopped playing the piano. They ran upstairs thinking she was injured. They shared the gospel with her with regard to her sin, and she was converted. But my father was never converted that I know of. When I was 17, we were out building a fence, and he yelled, and I grabbed him, and we fell to the ground, and he was dead. I had never known him to profess faith in Christ. It just manifested what I really was. I was a liar, the best. I mean, I don't know how to describe me except look up jerk in the dictionary. It had my picture there. Conceited, self-absorbed jerk. And I went to Murray State University for a few years and then decided that I wanted to be an oil and gas lawyer. Wherever that idea popped into my head, I don't know. Maybe it's because of the program Dallas or something. And the only place to do that was either Oklahoma or Texas. And I enrolled at the University of Texas.
Trey was a small child. His father abandoned him and his mother.
I wrestled with a sense of self-worth and am I even valuable? Because my dad decided, drugs would be better than hanging out with his own son or staying with me.
He found a sense of belonging in the hip-hop culture on the streets.
My uncles were young and wrapped up in the streets and, gangs and drugs and just promiscuous, and I idolized it. It was I wanted to be the gang member my uncle was. I wanted every tattoo he had. I saw my first gun and all these different things, and I was like, man, this must be what it means to be a man. And I'm just sitting on their laps, soaking all this stuff in. Like,
Missing.
I knew my ways were unfulfilling. I chased power, I chased pleasure, I chased possessions, I chased just something satisfying, and I knew I kept getting let down. I knew it was insanity, and I was never going to find fulfillment, but I didn't know what else to look for.
He kept a Bible in his car as a good luck charm. One night, police caught him trespassing and in possession of drugs. He was cuffed and sat in the police car waiting to go to jail.
And the police officer goes to my car, and he saw the Bible, and he came back to the police car and he said, son, you got a Bible in your car? And I said, yes, sir. He said, you know what that Bible's about? And I was like, I need to. And he said, well, you know what, today I'm gonna let you go because I want you to get into that Bible and I want you to start living it. And that really did something to me, and that really rocked me. And I didn't want to get in any kind of trouble like that again.